Sacredness of footprints, impressions in dust, rising like phoenix, powder, free to drift, to roam, settle, wherever it pleases. That is the implication of freedom.
Slavery ended, Jim Crow rising, oppression on a people.
Every genocide begins with the mind.
Movers seeking to self-define, to self-determine, to find a homestead, a steady home for themselves, their children, their posterity, a sanctuary. Movers towards freedom, visionaries with faith, our legacy from the dark past, moving towards the vision of hope of the present, the hope of the rising sun. In the West, New Mexico, soldiers, educators, doctors, farmers, cowboys, entrepreneurs, moving, journeying, to start a sanctuary of church on granite lands, land to homestead, to own, to create community.
Drinking freedom like moonshine on Saturday night.
My name is Grover L. Pettis. I'm, you might say, the grandfather of some of the Pettis family, which covers quite an area of families. You might say that I'm one of the older homesteaders that homesteaded property north and east of Las Cruces. And you might say that I'm one of the offsprings of the homesteader. The names of my parents was Robert Anderson Pettis was my dad's name. Ella Combs Pettis was my mother's name. And of course they were from around Paris, Texas, Red River County, Texas. And my dad was always somewhat of a farmer, or his career of life was mostly farming. And so there they started moving toward Oklahoma, into Boley, Oklahoma, and on into Oklahoma, and worked a few years around that area, and finally, because of the situation was not much better in Oklahoma as it was in Texas. It was hard to live in that particular area because of the some of the people that lived around there. At that time, it was very, very segregated in that particular area, and there were people that used to come around and intimidate them with the guns and shooting their guns and telling them that they would have to get out of town, that they didn't have any no homestead. You don't live here to just get out of Dodge, so to speak. And so by that time had Dad and Mom had a few children at that time, and naturally they were caring for the kids, and they didn't want them to get hurt, and they started looking forward to moving to a different location where they could raise the children and feel like they're in a safe environment. My dad and Mom decided, well, let's go to let's go to California, in which my mom's sister had already gone to Los Angeles, California, and kind of set up a home there in Los Angeles. And I think that's kind of where they had in mind to go to California when they left Texas and Oklahoma. So they, on their way to California, they stopped in Las Cruces, and in noticing that there was a river that ran down on the west side of town, there were, at that time, a lot of fruit trees. There were a lot of orchards that was along the river area. And of course, cotton and alfalfa, and there were some vegetables that were raised during that time. So he says, well, this is kind of what to me, it looks like a pretty good place to raise the children, because farming is my career type job. And I see that it looks like there's plenty of work to be done here. So they could see the river from the railroad tracks, and how some of the farms along there, it was all pretty and green at the time, and this kind of caught his eye, and they decided, well, let's stop here and let's try Las Cruces for a home. So they decided to stop here in 1923. Pop, knowing a lot of the families that lived here at that time, by 1927 or 28 or somewhere in that area, and this person that came down from Santa Fe, people at that time, they used to kind of come together at a certain place on Saturdays or on Sundays, and people would meet together. And of course, my dad, this person was inquiring as to where is all of the African-American people, where they live, and things like that. And my dad was able to bring several family members, men together, and the person that had the land for homesteading. And of course, they got together and they decided, well, this person, had conversation with all the men that was gathered there, and they decided to go back out on the northeast side of town here. And as they drove along in this little bus or whatever the person had to take them out there and show them different parcels of land, different sections of land, actually. And as they went by, this is section so on, so on, so on, so on. It's available to anyone that want to claim this land. And he told them about the requirements and everything on the land. Nevertheless, they would say, well, I'll take this parcel of land, and other people go along, and he said, well, I'll take this parcel of land. And it's kind of strange that my dad had told me earlier years that he had a dream. In later years, he told me about the dream. And he says, the place at Section 11, in which I claimed as my piece of property, I saw that in a dream years before even going up there. And he saw that in his dream a river that ran down through the center of this property. And I guess at the time he didn't think too much about it. But as he was going along, he got to that piece of that section of land, as he was approaching it and going into it, he says, "Oh, that's the land that I saw in my dream." He said, I'll take this one right here. This is my property right here, because this is the property that I saw in my dream. And so that's where Section 11 became available to them. He saw this piece of property and he saw it in his dream, and he fell in love with it right then and there.
My name is Bobby Jean Fuller Boyer, and I am a native of Vado, New Mexico. I was born and raised in New Mexico all of my 81 years, with the exception when I married. I went to Denver, Colorado, and I lived in Denver, Colorado for 20 years, back to Albuquerque, New Mexico for 5 years, and then I told my husband, which is his family was a prominent family here, I'm ready to go home. I'd like to go home and retire in Vado. He says, okay then. So that's how I ended back at home. And I don't regret not one day of it. This is my grandfather. He was the one, my grandfather came out here with his son, made their way to New Mexico. Once they heard about the land of enchantment and the land of freedom for blacks back in those days, he and his son traveled this way. And this is my step-grandmother. And my grandfather's name was Andrew Fuller, and he lived to be 98 years old. On this is my original family, and this is my grandmother, my father's mother. This is my father, and her name was Sibby Inez Fuller. His name was Sammy David Fuller, and my mom, her other connection with New Mexico, their family were Conleys. They also came to New Mexico, and she and my dad, they connected up here in New Mexico, and then they ended up with three little rugrats, and as you can see, that's actually 4. We lost one at birth. This is me. Don't I look good? And then this was my younger brother, and his name was Robert. And this is my older brother. His name was Chester, and he just passed away about a month ago. And my other brother, Robert, we lost him. And so that leaves the little beautiful thing in the middle.
Ray Collins, the grandson of George Holsome and his son, S.B. Holsome. Well, they homesteaded this land back in the day and built their house right over here to the right. And this was their livelihood. They grew crops, they sold water, they farmed. And while they were doing that, they also worked for other farmers in town to make it out here, to make it work out here on their homestead. So I have a lot of respect for my grandfather and my great-grandfather. Me and my grandfather, developed a real close relationship, and it just never ended. So that's why I know all about the land, and we would come out here and trap quail, and that was me doing good for him, I would also help him do jobs. We would go check out all the land that he homesteaded, or actually his dad homesteaded. So I knew my great-grandfather and my grandfather. They resembled each other quite a bit. It was all my great-grandfathers. He was the, original homesteader. And as time went on, it pretty much was my great-grandfather and my grandfather's. And then they sold off portions of it to take care of bills and whatever came up back then. That's why we're up here. He wanted this to be a farm. He wanted everybody to live up here.
My name is Brenda Jones. My maiden name was Williams, Brenda Williams. And then I was a journalist. My professional name is Brenda Payton. I grew up in Chicago, and with, my dad and his two brothers were physicians there and started a clinic, the Williams Clinic, in Chicago on the South Side. My grandmother actually lived till she was 108. So I was lucky enough to not just know her as a child, but as an adult. And actually, after Roots, she was interested in us telling the family story after the television series Roots. So we started doing her memoirs. And, I would interview her. So some of what I sent you, some of her description of the homestead was part of that project. I didn't know my grandfather had passed away before my parents were even married. But there were plenty of family stories about him. Just basically not taking any stuff. They were recruited to come to Las Cruces because, as you probably know, the schools were newly segregated racially in southern New Mexico because of the influx of the southern farmers into southern New Mexico. So, it's my understanding, Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Austin, the schools were not segregated. But in Las Cruces, so they suddenly needed African or Black or Negro at that time teachers. So they were recruited to come and teach in the newly segregated schools, and that's how they came to Las Cruces. So mostly they were farming on it, and obviously not on the whole portion. But my dad had a lot of, so he was when they started in 29, or so he was like a teenager, a young boy. And it was just ideal for him, riding horses, shooting, hunting rabbits. And he always spoke of it very fondly and was very proud of his dad because they didn't have a irrigation system or a water well. I guess the technology at that time they couldn't get to where the water was. So they were dependent on rainfall. And my dad always bragged about how his dad always seemed to know when it was going to rain, and he didn't know how, but he knew how it was going to rain, and was able to have crops of even watermelon and corn, I think they said. A lot of crops, which I can look at my notes. And so he was very proud of that.
How long did they live on the land? Did they have other jobs?
Yeah, she continued teaching. She was teaching the whole time at, I think it was Booker T. Washington School. So she stayed in town and he was on the land. And they would obviously visit back and forth, but that was the arrangement.
My name is Brenda Hazel Marie Ballou Dabney. That reflects my last name, which is Ballou, my maiden name rather, which is Ballou, and my married name Dabney. Anyway, I'm a native, proud native, African-American, New Mexican native, and I was born and raised here. My parents were born and raised here. And part of my grandparents were born and raised here. Looking on my daddy's side of the family, his grandfather, my great grandfather, was a Buffalo soldier by the name of John Collins, and he came out to New Mexico originally to guard the railroad workers as they were building the railroad across the country. He ran the mail run through the Pony Express program. He was assigned to to work on the moving of the riverbed by the Corps of Engineers. They were moving the Rio Grande riverbed, which ran, actually, if you looked at the old maps, it ran right down 1st and 2nd Street of Albuquerque. And they were moving it to the west side. They homesteaded when they came here. And my grandmother told me stories. His daughter, Alice, said that she remembers getting up very early in the morning, and he had a wagon, big, huge jumbo, they called it the jumbo wagon. And he would bring his children. She said we'd get up and get dressed, have breakfast, and then she says we'd get our blankets and wrap up and lay down in the wagon until we got to town, because it took them that long, and it was still dark in the wintertime, I guess. And she says she remembers curling up and sleeping in the back of that wagon until they got to town. And by the time they got to town, the sun was coming up, and they'd get ready and go to school, So she talked about that was one of her stories.
According to historian Barbara Richardson, Dr. James Lewis came to Albuquerque, New Mexico from Richmond, Virginia in 1918 for his health. He started the People's Sanitarium and the Booker T. Washington Sanitarium. On August 4th, 1919, Dr. Lewis put in entry for 160 acres of homestead land under the 1862 Homestead Act. He received his patent for the land in October of 1924. He was a member of the Fraternal Aid Society Group, a group of African-American entrepreneurs who encouraged land ownership. By 1938, the homestead of Dr. Lewis was in the hands of the Fraternal Aid Society and its secretary, Henry Outley. On June 16, 1938, a plat and survey of the East End Addition was accepted by Bernalillo County of New Mexico.
After the passing of Dr. Lewis, his homestead went to Henry Outley, secretary of the Fraternal Aid Society. Henry Outley deeded the homestead for $1 to Virginia Ballou, who he considered his daughter, and her husband Frank in 1946. Virginia had kept the records of the Fraternal Aid Society since she was 17. She had listened to their dreams and visions for the land for over 8 years. Upon the death of Henry Outley in 1947, Virginia moved forward with the vision of the East End Addition. In 1950, Virginia held a grand opening with 3 model homes. Between 1950 and 1955, 21 additional homes were built.
The Outleys, going back to my mother, they raised my mother and her brother, because my grandmother, even though she had that job, she stayed with them. They became her family, and so they raised the 2 little ones, and provided a home for my grandmother, and so my mother was great. Her Mr. and Mrs. Outley were, I guess they were both they had a close bond. They were like her grandparents, and so and she loved him very, very much, and loved both of them very, very much. And because they bonded together, they were family, and so he always saw a lot of promise in my mom, and he encouraged her to always be her best, to do her best, and anyway, that's how she became very close to him. It was like her grandfather. She called him Papa Outley, and she called his wife, Florida. She called her. We called her Big Mama.
That was around 1927. As close as I can understand, that we, when he became homesteaded. And there was 640 acres within that square mile. It was a square mile piece of property in there. And there was many things that needed to be done, the requirements of building fences. There was no water up there. There was no water. The only water would be up there is rainwater that would fall into these cisterns or pools that you dig for the cattle. Because at that time it was cattle country, and there were like cowboys that were running cattle all in the area there, and it was just wide open out there. 1948 is when we finally drilled our first well up there. My dad was fortunate to sell 240 acres off of Section 11 to have enough money to come down here on Section 14 and buy 407 acres of land down here on Section 14, in which this is where we live, and this is where the business started.
That homestead.
Yeah, that Section 11 provided enough money to buy this section here. And so that's how we got this one, is that we sold 240 up there and bought this one.
You had 400 on that acreage. You still had 400.
400 and some acres up there. Then we had another 400 here. So in the process of moving here, that was in about 1952, 53, someplace in that area that Mom bought this place here. And well, I was working at the base at White Sand and Holloman Air Force Base. And the time came, I told my dad, I said, you know one thing? We got all of this land, 400 and some acres up on Section 11 and 400 and something acres here on Section 14. And we can't do nothing with it because we don't have no water. And we need to start concentrating on drilling a well so we can get water, so we can develop. That's the only way we are going to be able to develop this property here. So we came together. He said, "Well, that makes sense," but he says, "We're going to have to come together and see where we can find some money to do that." And that's when I called people together and I said, you know, people, family, we are faced with a situation that we got plenty of land. We don't have any water on it. We don't have no utilities on it. But somehow we're going to have to figure a way to develop this land here, and this is one we need to concentrate on. And so when we come together, we come together and decided, well, let's become a partnership, and we'll see what we can do, and you go out and see if you can find some money at the banks or loan companies or wherever you can find some money, and see if you can borrow enough money to do a well. I set out to find some money. I went to every bank in Las Cruces, and it was the same thing. No, I'm sorry, we can't, there's no water out there. We can't, that's a bad investment out there to try to go find some water. There's no water out there. I said, well, why don't you let me decide whether there's water out there or not, you know? All I want to do is borrow some money. We got plenty of land, and well, no, y'all just gonna spend your money, and you just gonna be spinning your wheels. Well, I brought the bad news back to him, and prayerfully thinking and wondering what our next step would be, and the thought coming to my mind, I said, well, we got to come back to the home base, you know, and we're going to have to start thinking that all of us got little homes, you know, that we have been fortunate to get along the way, and let us borrow some money on our homes and pool our resources, and we'll have enough money to drill a well. And in the process, that's where we became a little partnership, and that was first part of the 1961 or 2 or 3, somewhere in that area. And so we decided, well, okay, let's do that. So we went to the bank and we got our monies counted together, and then we found a guy that worked at White Sands. He had the well equipment that he did, and I talked to him, and O.L. Page was the driller's name, and we made a deal to have this one drilled.
A lot of the men were farmers, and there's one a young lady's grandfather. His name was Hobart Boyer. Oh, he was a big-time farmer. And then there was several other farmers and then my grandfather, he was a big farmer. Like I said, I hate to name people, but there was quite a few big farmers.
What types of crops?
Cotton, mostly cotton at that time. Yes. And then later on, there were people that owned like the onion sheds and the lettuce companies where they shipped them out, and they were located right there by the railroad track, right in close to my house. So they did quite a bit of onions and lettuce here also. But cotton, back in the day when the black people started settling here, it was mostly cotton farming. Some other people got other jobs, but that was the biggest thing. My dad, he owned a grocery store here in Vado for a number of years. It was called Pioneer Grocery. And besides that, also where we're getting this interview, right in back of the school, there are 5 acres of land. Those belong to him. And up the road a little ways, between the 2 houses on up the road, he owned another plot of land, which was also 5 acres. And also that made his land, a total of 10 acres altogether. And I would like to also show you. Now, this is I know some people never seen a grocery store like this, but this was the very first grocery store. A place where it was housed is on the main street, I'm gonna call it, in Vado. And of course the building is no longer standing because at a later date, as a matter of fact, I know the date because I was in first grade when we moved over to our new grocery store, and that was in 1945. And this is what our new grocery store looked like. This was built in 1948. My mom she wrote that on the back of the picture. And this is what the grocery store looked like. And it existed until in the 60s, after my father passed away in 58. And then the store, my brother and we ran the store for a while, and then we gave up on the store. Roosevelt Boyer Sr. And what he did, now he didn't farm, but he helped make the chemicals and things. He worked at the plant where they helped make the chemicals and things to put on the vegetation and on the cotton. He worked there for years and years and years. This is a story I've heard all my life, and I'm sure some of the other people have. My husband's great-grandfather, he was a porter on the train, and he would come through here. And One time he came through, and of course they had a place where they could stop and stay. Nobody seems to remember that but me. But anyway, they had some, little housing and stuff that they could stay in overnight. And when he came through here, they were right up against the railroad. And when he came through here, and he looked around, and some kind of way he saw these, he looked at Vado and he said, "Gee, that looks like a land of plenty and sugar and honey, And so when he went back from his job, he said, "I think we're gonna move out to Vado."
Just being with my grandfather was real special to me. I went to work with him. I worked the whole summers with him. For me doing good, working with him, he would either take me fishing or we would come up here and trap quail, and he loved doing that. He was just special to me, real special. My great grandfather, I know him good, but I didn't get to spend like quality time with him. He was older, and we would go visit him every Sunday at his house. 4th grade, I was going rabbit hunting with a 12-gauge shotgun, walking out in the desert. This was rabbit hunting country, right on the outskirts of Cruces. I was an entrepreneur.
Pick it up, buddy.
Probably since I was in 3rd or 4th grade.
What's up, boy?
I never thought it would end up being part of my business, but I used to clean all the neighborhood gardens and mow their lawns, and I was kind of small because I had to get my friend that was in like 4th grade or 5th grade to help push the lawnmowers for me. Then the lawnmowers had to live with the choppers. So I couldn't push him. My friend, I'll never forget, he was a real stocky dude, and he didn't get along with nobody but me. And he used to beat up all the kids in the neighborhood, but I had him be my best friend. So I never had to deal with him. But he was so strong, man. He ended up being a bodybuilder later. I mean, big old strong dude, but he would push the lawnmowers, help me push the lawnmowers, and I would pay him to help me do the lawns and stuff like that back then. So I've been doing lawns since I was in like 3rd, 4th grade. And now I'm 57 and still doing it. I don't know if it's just kind of genes or blood, but my grandfather, he worked and worked and worked. That's how I am. I didn't even lost women for working too much. You know what I mean? And I never thought that would happen. But it is what it is. But yeah, I'm a workaholic. That's my high. You know what I mean? That's my Bud Light. That's my high. That and coming out here and dealing with the animals and stuff. It used to be coming and trapping quail. That was my favorite thing, fishing with my grandfather and trapping quail and walking the landmarks. That was the specialist. That was super special for me.
And your grandmother, what did she do?
My grandmother, she was quiet but strong. She was everything to me. She probably helped make me think I was older than I was. But she, back then, she stood right there beside whatever my grandfather was doing. You know what I mean? She was a superwoman. She was everything for me too. Like I say, we were real tight with our grandparents. And her mother, Miss Ramsey, she's the one that knew Billy the Kid, that had a crush on Billy the Kid. That Billy the Kid would stop by her house when she was young. So my grandmother, she didn't really have to struggle for money. I kept her solid, and my mom played a big part of it too. She was right there along, like, I don't know how you're doing this or how you're figuring this out, but you're doing it, and I'm proud of you. But everybody think I'm crazy. The whole time that was going on, my grandpa was talking to me, telling me what was going on. You know what I mean? Like, I would ask him, "Grandpa, what would you do?" Like, you know what I mean? And I swear to God, he would answer. So maybe that's why this place is so important to me.
But we had a ranch out there. The ranch was right there where the East End Addition is today. It was between Lomas and the freeway and Wyoming and Pennsylvania. He had some animals out there, you know, and we would go out and have to check on the animals. He had a windmill, and he had a boxcar for a habitat, and that's where we stayed. When we went out to the ranch, we stayed in the boxcar. And there was a stove, a wooden stove, to give us some heat in the wintertime. They drew up plans and plotted it all out. They had plans for homes that African Americans could enjoy, nice homes, nice neighborhoods. They had, there was a women's and children's hospital, and they had plans for shopping centers and churches. And so they had really worked it all out. When she was ready to start building, she couldn't find a builder here locally. And so she went to, someone told her about this African-American builder in Phoenix. And we made several trips back there to meet him. I remember going on those trips. So she retained J.S. Jones, John Jones. They started construction on the houses. They built the first models. And I remember that because I can remember that was an exciting day. And they had all these, I helped them put up all those, you know how you put up these flies, these flags, you know, I was helping doing that. Whatever I could do, they gave me little gopher jobs, you know. And then I remember getting all dressed up for the opening. But I remember the first family to say, put their money down were the Palmers. Once the Palmers bought the first house, that was the first step. Then other people came up, wanted to buy homes and put their money down, put in their orders. And that's when the ball started to roll.
Why did African Americans start leaving Vado?
Oh, now that's the bad part. The Rio Grande River was the way that the crops and everything were, you know, they were watered. But the water table dropped, and they weren't able to get the water freely like they could before. And they started, you know, charging so much, you have to pay so much for the water. And since you know, that drove a lot of people away, they said, oh gosh, we have to go someplace else and try to find us better ways of making a living. And this is when Vado started falling down, and a lot of the black people started moving out to California and Arizona and places like that. But none of them didn't move back down south, though. Yes, the majority of them went further west. During the time that the draft was in effect, well, this is I remember that rule very well. We'll leave you one son, every family. We do have a military wall in this building, and you will see a lot of the guys that went, because they took all of the sons, but they left one son per family, so that, you know, your generation wouldn't die.
We had the bare necessities, you know, to live on. Dad had to buy 25 pounds of cornmeal, 25 pounds of flour, and things like that. We just bought it in bulk and stuff like that, and a slab bacon and things like that. And those were hard times during that time, because I was during the Depression after we moved out there. He still had to go back and forth every day. Come back to town and work, come back out at night, go back to town and work, you know, like that. So he had a long ride to go with horse and team and a wagon. So that was his only, at that time, that was the only transportation that he had, was the mules and the wagons. And his job was down here in town, but he had to live out there a certain period of time to meet the requirements that the state required. It was a hard time because we'd see him in the mornings, at night, maybe when we'd come in, and then of course we didn't see him all day because he had to come back to town to go to work. And when we got back out there, many times we were asleep when he got there. So Mom had to maintain the kids. She had a job just maintaining and looking after kids and cooking for them and washing for them. These houses were not built like houses are built now. They was built, and some of the wood would be, you could kind of see the outside through the cracks in there. So what we had to do is we used to, Mom and Pop and the kids, the girls, we used to save all the newspapers and cardboard boxes and take flour, mix flour and water together and put that flour up on there, and then we stick that paper all around in there, and it would cut the air from coming in. So I remember those hard times.
A lot of the homesteaders, they ended up, some moved into town. It was just easier, more manageable to, I guess, I'm thinking to take care of your family, because this is way out, you know what I mean? Way out. So like it was us, it was the Holsomes. We lived in and then it was the Ramseys, which my grandfather married, Arlene. She's Arlene Holsome, but she was a Ramsey. And so it was quite a few blacks that had moved into town. The Joneses, they still had their land out here that they homesteaded, but eventually a lot of them moved into town because it was just, I'm pretty sure it was easier to manage, because it used to seem like a long ways to come out here because it wasn't anything. They would get fresh roadkill off the side of the highway, rabbits that, from people that hit in the morning going to work and stuff. So they walked everywhere. I'm not sure if they had a vehicle at the time. They had pigs. That log they had, it was pigs, chickens, I think cows, goats. Yeah, when he went to town, I know he worked for the Stallman. Like Stallman Farms is the biggest pecan orchard, one of the largest pecan orchards in the world. And I know he worked for them. And then I know he eventually worked for Sears when Sears came around back in the day. But yeah, they definitely lived off the land out here. He actually owned, if you go that way, I mean, he said he had several sections out here. And through hard times, coming on down to me coming around, they had to sell off parcels of land to stay afloat. They had a water well out there, out by NASA somewhere. And my grandfather said that, they blew it up. So the
well was on his property?
Yeah, I don't know if it was on his, but are centrally located with all the other homesteaders. But everybody went together and had a well put out there, and they got out there one day and somebody had blew it up.
So was there animosity between groups at the time of the homestead?
Nah, really. All the blacks got along real good. I kind of hate to say it, but it was just still kind of prejudice back then. And, the blacks, that group was pretty sharp and was getting ahead and had their own water, and they put an end to it, I can't point fingers. I wasn't around. They were saying it was, white people that were doing better and, wanted the land. But, I guess that's just how it was back then, through hard times and paying bills from his father, the original homesteader, George Holsome, paying bills on him as he got sick. They sold partials off. Actually, they sold a lot of land off.
And the part with Nassau. Is that still yours? Or?
Nah, that's NASA's.
Okay.
You know, that I didn't have a choice. They were either, and my lawyer was his name was Fernando Macias, and he was like, you don't want to go to court with the government. I wouldn't have had the money to battle it out, you know. So it was our decision together to, well, it really wasn't a decision. It was like, they're taking it. If you don't, you know, we'll deal with them, then they're just gonna get it. They're gonna take it from you, because it was, I mean, it was a serious issue. It was into the water table, chemicals into the water table.
And how much land was it?
That was 293 acres.
As we understood it, there was a conflict. He declined the insurance policy, and then there was a very suspicious fire later that destroyed the store and all the inventory, and basically ended that. And that was a big dream for him in El Paso. He actually studied to become a pharmacist. He didn't pass that the first time he took that test. But he had a partner, and they had another pharmacy in Juarez. So this was a big thing for him, and I think that fire really did a lot to crush him, really. There was a challenge claiming that he wasn't putting in the amount of time on living in residency. The only thing I knew about that challenge from grandmother was that somehow there were some African-American women involved with that. And because that was a particular, you know, hurtful to him that he would be challenged by other Black people. They even hired a lawyer, which was, I'm sure, an extreme financial burden. And maybe I need to look at this. The lawyer was not able to completely beat back the challenge, but they ended up, it was like, I guess, some kind of a settlement where he had to spend another 2 or 2.5 years before getting the patent. But he did eventually get the patent. He was having conflicts with a cattleman whose name was Isaac, I think. Or Isaacs, who, according to my dad, you know, he or his workers would cut the fencing to let the cattle graze on my grandfather's land and crops. And this was an ongoing battle. So I'm not sure if they thought maybe the cattleman had something to do with the challenge. Because I started really looking into this, I also saw the way that a different approach to resistance could affect you, you know. And I think my grandfather was very much, in the end, beaten down.
Jasper Williams, have you heard his name? Civil rights leader, revolutionary, warrior for his people, takes on the Department of Interior, fights for steady homes, homesteads for his people. Hear his words.
Dear Mr. Secretary, on November 3rd, 1932, I submitted final proof for HE number 033953 Las Cruces series. In doing so, I fully complied with your regulations and those of the local land offices here, and that of the general land offices. Nobody but a defenseless and struggling Negro would try to develop the lands where my homestead is. Yet our cattle, horses, mules have been driven away, and our little crops destroyed each year by bad cattle driven into our settlement during the months of May. Nothing done about it. Now to move the damn nigger, Jasper Williams, out. It seems a scheme concocted over 2 years ago to make endure hardship and trouble for me and cause me to have to pay big lawyers' fees From what the local land offices say here, a fee from about $25 or $35 for testimonies of witnesses. Are these heavy fees allowed by your department to be charged poor homesteaders who are made the victims of peculiar tactics of field agents? I know the Secretary will be just and fair in this matter. Yours truly, Jasper Williams. When Jasper Williams came to Las Cruces in 1924 to teach their newly segregated schools, he decided to homestead 630 acres of land under the 1916 Stock Raising Homestead Act. He would join about 40 other African Americans homesteading outside of Las Cruces. Jasper quickly realized the many obstacles facing the African American homesteaders: intimidations by local residents, lack of economic resources, lack of water for irrigation, and the prohibitive cost for drilling a well. The stereotypes officials had of African Americans as superstitious, feeble-minded, and unable to understand homestead laws. From 1926 until 1941, Jasper did exhaustive letter writing to local and federal authorities demanding that attention be paid to these issues facing Negro homesteaders and the inequities in the treatment be addressed. It took from 1926 to 1936 for Jasper Williams to receive his patent. He had to go to court to fight the adverse actions taken by the U.S. government to prevent his patent. Jasper Williams was labeled as a chronic troublemaker, but through perseverance, he would receive his patent in July of 1936.
Taxes, it says here, a year assessed, and they started in 1925, and it was with Dr. Lewis, and the acres were 160 acres, and then he paid 160 for a number of years. People were very proud of their homes out there, and you know, it was fulfilling a dream that my grandfather had, and my mother would say this, that she would sell to anyone, but she wanted to make sure that her people, you know, could have nice homes out there. And because there was redlining, I guess, was going on, you know, people didn't want to sell to African Americans.
It was nothing out there. It was dusty, windy. My mom used to kill a rattlesnake every other day. Dad purchased the home through the GI Bill. He had come from the war, and a lot of the soldiers had gotten the GI Bill to be able to get a loan to purchase the home. And they had to get their financing in Texas because there was no bank in Albuquerque that would finance these blacks that wanted to buy these homes.
Nothing up there, dirt roads. Grader used to come to the neighborhood, and all the boys in the neighborhood, we used to try to see if we could beat the grader across the street as it was coming down the street. And I decided to do it on my own, and I got told on and got home and got a whipping and had to stay in the room the rest of the day. So I learned from that, you know. But when you're young, you don't know about those things, you know, that are dangerous like that. But anyway, we used to, me and my brother used to walk up to the U Mountain because there was nothing up there. And we'd take our BB guns and we'd shoot horny toads and lizards and birds, you know, and just go out and do those kind of things, you know. And it was just fun. It was the neighborhood was a real sense of community, you know. As Levon had said, it was a sense of community because everybody knew everybody, and everybody looked out for everybody, you know. And it was just great growing up that way. And as time went slowly on, they started buying everybody out, you know, and they were building the freeway, and I guess what do you call that, eminent domain or whatever, and use that too and all of that to buy all the property out. And then they started coming toward our neighborhood as the same way. And they wanted to buy us out too. They wanted to get rid of us. And they couldn't do it. And that's when they started rezoning and putting all those car lots over there and everything. And I just remember one day Mr. Robinson was going to everybody's house in the neighborhood and talking to all the parents. And he said, look, they're trying to force us out of here. We need to stand together as people so they don't do it. And everybody did stand together in the neighborhoods, and they couldn't force us out the way they wanted to. But they just changed everything around us, trying to push us out that way. But, you know, it was just good to see how all the adults, you know, stood up together, you know, against, you know, those forces that wanted to. Because when the families moved out there, there was nothing out there. And then all of a sudden the area got discovered. And then everybody started moving out there. And that's when they wanted to start pushing us out. But like I said, it was just a great neighborhood to grow up in.
I used to see my dad witching this water. So yeah, I said, well, if he can do it, I can do it too. I'm gonna get out there and let me try it. I'll walk behind him and see if my stick will do the same thing that his is doing. So this is how we witched the water. And so we were going across the property, and this thing this tree limb that we had, it had two legs here and one sticking up. As we walked across, this stick started bending over, and I couldn't hold it tight as I get. It just come on down. And that's where my dad says that when it gets down there, that's where the water line, that's water down there. Mm-hmm. And if we go by it, it'd come back this way. And then it'd point us out where the water was. We'd go up some other and come back the other way. See if it worked at the same place, areas. And that's how we found our water, is witching the water. And then we told the well driller, drill it right here. That's where our water is. It was kind of a joyous time to see water coming out of the ground out here in the desert, you know. Yeah, it was a blessing. And of course, once we put the pump down in there and turned the pump on there and got electric and everything run to it, and we were fortunate to have electricity here, you know. And we had to run it about 1,100 feet or something to our well, but still, the possibility was there. And turned the pump on and just sounded like air. Air was coming out at first because air is in the pipe before the water, and the water's pushing the air out. All we heard was shh, you know, like air was coming out. And we were just looking. Everybody was quiet as a mouse. All of a sudden the water said, phew, and water come out there, and boy, everybody started jumping up and down and thanking God, wow, look at that, that water is coming out. And I tell you, that was some of the prettiest and best water in the valley. I think we think that, I always call it God's water because we prayed for it and we asked God to make it possible. And that from that well there, we became a corporation. That's where we began to see some development on this particular place. Is once that water came up, and we saw the water, we immediately started making plans for the maps. Once I started selling the land, I had sold more than 25 lots, so to speak, 25 pieces of property, and I was serving water to them. So once the PRC found out that I was selling water to people in the area, then they told me, they sent me a letter and told me that, Mr. Pettis, you are serving more than 25 people in the plot. out there. Now you're going to have to become a utility because we're in regulation. We regulate the water in the area. You have to go through public regulations. You're under public regulations now because you're selling more than this much now. And of course, right then, I said, click, 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 click. I'm gonna have to go back to school again. And that's when I started going to New Mexico Water and Wastewater Association from Albuquerque, or from Albuquerque Center. That was a pretty good schooling for me. And I put all of that into my business. I made that work for me. I built my water system, putting it together and making it work like it's supposed to work. I put it together myself. And I put number 1 well in. Once I got number well in and got it all figured out, number 2 and number 3 well was a piece of cake. This became the main source of a business at that time. And so we sold the land, we sold water to the people that we sold the land to.
Now, the Texas line is 9 miles from here, okay? Now, my mom and I, we would get on the bus right there in front of our grocery store because we were the bus stop. We could ride from our house to Texas, and we knew automatically that we had to get up and go and get in the back of the bus. They would not let us ride into Texas. You hear people talk about country, living in the country. Who wants to live in the country? If some of you all who are just a few years old, and if you had been here in the country, you would have got the best life there is. There's nothing like living in a country. And let me interject that. Living in Vado, which was almost a totally black community, and we had tons of kids and everything. And growing up here, we had all kinds of entertainment. And our biggest entertainment, and I want you all to know, and which kids have forgotten about today, is church. We would get up on Sunday mornings, walk from my house, which was about half a mile from the church and my brothers, and all of the families that were around town, almost everybody went to Sunday school, church, and guess what, guys? At 6 o'clock in the afternoon, after we finished playing our baseball games, after we finished doing our roller skating out here, we knew that when, I don't know who had the watch at the time, but I tell you what, we knew when it was 6 o'clock every Sunday afternoon, because that was the end of the baseball game. I don't care who was the winner, who was the loser. We were on our way to Baptist Training Union at Valley Grove Missionary Baptist Church in Vado, New Mexico. And it wasn't like, today the kids, I don't want to go to church. Oh, no. We didn't come up with that. We automatically knew that at that time, we were on our way to BTU. And so these days, so many kids don't know anything about the Bible and about church. Hey, we had some excellent teachers in Valley Grove Baptist Church. There were a bunch of boys, I think there were 6 or 7 of them, and most of them, they studied the Bible, they knew the Bible, and they were our teachers, and we learned. Nowadays, children, you show them a Bible, they might ask you, what is that? Well, we had no problem with that. We definitely knew. And I grew up in the church along with some of the other young ladies, and we all got excellent training. And out of the training, a lot of us have stayed in church, become great leaders in church, and great teachers, and so forth.
I hate to see it be demolished and becoming a car lot. I just wish that Mr. Bowles, he talked to me, and I had my head in so many other activities when he talked to me. I think it was about, I looked at some of the dates, I think it was about in the early 20s, 2003 or something like that. I'm just looking at some of the dates of the letters he sent. He sent me a letter. He called me, he sent me a letter, and he asked me to go to a couple of the meetings, and I did. The purpose of that meeting was to save that neighborhood as a historical site, as a historical neighborhood, and to have it named as historical by the state and the city. It's just deteriorated from there because the original owners have died, and their children either moved out of Albuquerque or moved to other parts of the city.
Did things together, and we watched out for each other. Like I said, the kids, we would walk to school together. We we knew from our parents that to make sure that you take care of each other. So we all made sure that, because it wasn't that many of us blacks, once everybody else moved in and we went to the schools, it was just a few of us. And, once we went to the schools and really got there, that's when they first started calling us names, and that kind of thing. And so there was always fights, and we made sure that we stuck together and won them fights, and they would leave us alone as long as, as we stuck together. Churches, in the neighborhood, you either went to New Hope, you went to Mount Olive, which was the church that we went to, or you went to Grand Chapel AME Church in the neighborhood, or you went to another church, but everyone with a sense of community, had a church home that they went to, and that helped out with the sense of community and who we were.
Everybody planted fruit trees, and we planted gardens, and that was the other thing. If we had a bunch of this, it went, who needs this or who needs that? But we all had gardens, we all had fruit trees, and it was purposed all among us.
That sense of community. If anybody was sick or anybody needed anything, one of the neighbors would come in and help out the neighbors. Whether it was helping to clean out your house, go make go get things for you, whatever it might be, there was always somebody there to help. We just took it for granted. That's the way life was. Until you really got out in the world, it wasn't always that way. But within the neighborhood, there was a sense of community. And then, we still had a sense of community with the South Broadway area because we had friends and family down there. The Kirkland Edition, the same thing, because we all knew each other, and all did things together. So that was always great, So the community, even though we had pockets of black families all over the city, everybody pretty much knew everybody back then, or somehow were together or related or just friends or in, the clubs, because they had a lot of different clubs that the women and the men were in, over those years where they all came together, But the church was always the community.
But yeah, all this out here was, it was all blacks out here. They came down here and it was pretty much land opportunity, and you fence your land in and you put claim on it, and it's your land. I don't ever plan on selling it. I just hope, through the generation, they, like I have sons, I hope they be interested in it like I am. That land over there that has my grandfather's name, he gave up that land, and rest in peace, he never even got to see the sign put up. They kept bull jiving and wouldn't put it up, and so I had to go to get with the state and let them know how that went on. And my grandfather gave the access to this land and for this road to get his name up, and his name isn't up, and what's the problem? And finally after my grandfather passed away, I was so mad that he never got to see his name. I got his name put up on the road. That should have been done years before. My grandfather's dream was to have this, somebody living up on his land, and he wanted it. He said he wanted to grow vegetables and raise food and stuff up here. And we actually grew a garden this past summer, and he was right. It grew some nice vegetables. This ground is real good up here. When they put that frontage road in here, we had to give up that land, and they buy it as higher than the land selling. But you can't say no to stop the city project. So they made us sell all that land across the whole front, all the way to that corner. I just want to keep everything the same. You know what I mean? I don't want to change up nothing.
Excuse me, the person that I had to, that signed, that was supposed to sign me up, give me the go ahead with the corporation, he had to sign it, see. And he gave me a hard time. Well, these maps here, I don't like the way these maps is. This map ain't so, this is not according to the way that I think it ought to be. And my surveyor was there, see. He says, sir, I'm a certified map surveyor. I've been surveying for many, many years. There's nothing wrong with this map. I've checked it out, and I'll verify that everything is all right. He said, well, then he jumped on me about, well, you ain't got no water. What's your water? You ain't got no water. Pay all these people water. How you gonna serve water to all these people and you ain't got no water? I said, sir, we have plenty of water. We got a well that's pumping good, and it's some of the best water in the valley. So that didn't, well, he wasn't satisfied still. Well, I got a petition here. You got to go to all of these people here, all these people that already bought property. You got to get them to put their signature on here that they want this to be a subdivision and this they want to be a part of it and all that kind of stuff. I said, oh my God, how am I going to do that? A lot of things went through my mind. Man, that's when prayer came in there. Good master told me, you can do it. I got the petition. I went to every one of these people. Boy, they was thrilled to sign. They was thrilled to sign that. Every one of them signed it, and I took it back to him and laid it there. He looked at it. Well, I guess it's all right, I guess. He finally put the signature on it there. But he was giving me a hard time. But I stayed with it. And after then, we actually came with the corporation, Mesa Development Center Incorporated.
And my dad sold most of his section, but we still have 10 acres. It's kind of a little bit unusual. It hasn't actually been specifically delineated which 10 acres, but the developer of that section knows that my mother and brother and I still own 10 acres of that. And the other part that my dad sold, they used to purchase the house that I live in and the house that my brother lives in.
Your grandmother moves to Chicago, and she was in her 50s at that time. So what, did she continue as an educator?
She only worked at the clinic. Yeah, but she worked there until she was 90, late 90s. She worked in the lab. And so people, would have to get a marriage license, they'd have to get a blood test. And she was just known as Grandma, and she'd give, advice about how to stay married. And so she refused to, she would take the bus to work. She refused for a long time to let anyone drive her. She had what we called pop, or soda machine, there, in that area, and the money from that she gave to her grandchildren. And it, was interesting. These were some of the lessons we learned of how, even though it was whatever, a nickel or a dime, how that added up, and it was, I think she gave money for when we went to college. I think that was it. But anyway, she saved that money and gave it to us.
How did she feel about getting these honors from a school that had sort of diminished her when she was a student there?
I think she very much felt vindicated. I think that's in fact why she told us, because from her point of view, telling us what had happened was then safe, I guess, because it had been rectified. And in fact, that acceptance speech, when she got the honorary doctorate, she gave part of it in Spanish, and she was 95 then.
So when did you start coming back out here onto the homestead?
We never stopped. Ever since I was small, we always came back and forth. It never stopped. So our first little project, me and my grandma, I told her, Grandma, my grandpa wanted everybody to live out here. I said, so let's make a trailer park out here. But you need money to keep going on the trailer park. So then I was like, Grandma, it was a good idea, but we don't have the money to keep building and adding trailer spaces. He said how much it was for these 3. So we paid them 3 trailer spaces off and just start renting out the trailers. That's why I got 3 trailer spaces right there. But then we said, well, we'll just end up using those spaces for, like, Grandpa wanted everybody to move out here. We'll move in them. So we had a couple, like my sister made a trailer space, my other sister, and then I gave one of the trailer spaces to my sister here, and then I got 2 right there. Here, it used to be everybody got along in Las Cruces. When we came up, we got along well. Everybody knew everybody. All the blacks. It wasn't a black that you didn't know in Las Cruces. All the blacks that went to my school, I was related to them. Me, my sister, my cousins, and that's how it was. And if they wasn't cousins, they was a distant cousin. My grandfather, even though all that crazy stuff went on and him coming up and getting up, he always raised us to treat everybody equal. So we never looked at nobody different or anything. We know it was harder for us to do stuff, but he taught us, it is what it is, but everybody's equal. You have your good and bad of everybody. We done come a long ways, we really have. And it ain't stopping, it's getting better. It's still crazy stuff going on, but it's actually getting better. I was a kid that never could blame anybody for nothing that I did, you know what I mean? But that's how my grandfather raised us, and it worked for us. Grandfather was here to help me, but that would have made it a whole lot easier. But yeah, he passed too young, man. I even think my grandmother passed it too young. She's 93. She could have probably been 150, and I would think that was too young. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
She just kills me they're gone.
I think it was not until I was much older that I understood the magnitude and the importance of the whole situation once I started understanding about the homesteading process and that my grandparents moved up 6 or 7 miles from here. We complained about driving from here to Las Cruces 6 miles, and my grandfather was by horse and wagon from town here and then another 6 or 7 miles. And so those kinds of things I started thinking about that and how amazing that was to do that. I mean, I just can't even imagine having to do that, as dark as it was, doing that for your family, working all day, driving all the way home, going to bed, getting up and doing it again the next day. And I think what has happened is the work ethic was instilled in us, because even when I was going to retire the first time, I said, ooh, I can't retire because my dad was still working. So, I felt like a goof off, trying to retire and he was still working.
And once Dad retired and I became office manager and Merlin became the vice president of the company, that's when I really started appreciating what basic development was all about, because now I was in the fold. I was really in the fold. I was in the office, and the billing, the meter reading, the bills, the sending out the bills. We did everything family-wise, and I learned the intricacies of Mesa development, and I realized how important Mesa development was to this area, because we provided water to a lot of people. You know, we provided good water to a lot of people, a lot of families, and you know, the water, it was worse than the mail, because the mail sometimes takes days off. Mesa development was 24/7, 365, because they had to have water. It was a legacy that, you know, my grandpa and my dad had started, you know, and no other men wanted to take that responsibility. My grandpa and my dad had it. When they named this Mesa Development Center Incorporated, you know, again, the vision that this was going to be the center of Las Cruces, and that's where Mesa Development Center come from. This is eventually going to be the center of Las Cruces, and it was moving this way, and it's still moving this way.
One of the most amazing things that I learned later on is that that they had the property up in Section 11, and that the wisdom of my grandfather to say, let me sell some of that and buy some of the land here. We're right at Highway 70.
Yeah.
And
Prime.
if you can, you know, the growth of this highway since the time when we were young, there was, Steve said there was nothing, it was dark. There was nothing that's dark. And they're still continuing to build franchises all along this highway. So the vision of my grandfather and my dad selling land up there and buying it here. I mean, I'm just amazed at that. Wow, you know.
When I go home, you know, I can sit on my dad's porch. It seems like everybody who passes the house honks their horn and waves. You know, it's just like, hey, you know. So it's still a big sense of family, and everybody knows that even though we don't pay our water bill to the Pettises anymore, that, you know, those are still the Pettises, and they're still, you know, an important family and an important piece of just living on Mesa development. I want them to first go to school and, you know, have their grades, and if they go to college or whatever, and wherever that leads them at that point, you know, they have to make their own journey for sure, but, you know, not to forget and to always go back. And I don't know if it'll be a place to where they ever live on the land, but they always have to go back. Can't just forget about it.
You know, it was fulfilling a dream that my grandfather had, and my mother would say this, that she would sell to anyone, but she wanted to make sure that her people, you know, could have nice homes out there. And because there was redlining, I guess, was going on, you know, people didn't want to sell to African Americans. When the base opened up and Sandia Labs opened up, you know, was opened up, that was drawing people to that part of the city. Those were good jobs. We were doing things, and we were contributing to the improvement of the city. My mother tried to encourage us when we were young, when my husband Frank and I were young in our marriage. She said, you know, you can't go wrong with real estate. You know, she always thought, you know, you take care of it and they'll take care of you later. You know.
I remember that the Fraternal Aid Society, my grandfather had this vision when he would talk about it. They all had this vision that there would be homes, and there would be parks, and there would be hospitals and shopping centers. And he did say a shopping center where everything under one roof, you could get everything. You could have your film developed in one part, buy a coat in another part. That was the mall that he was talking about. They were visionaries, these men, and they could see this. And they said there were going to be super highways, and that's what they call the freeway. They said you can go from one end of town to the other without stopping and get there in a short length of time. And that was our modern freeways. But they envisioned all this. And so they knew that was going to be the heart of the town one day.
I think Rich Ford, I remember when they built Rich Ford. That was the first of the car lots.
And before they, like I said, got the car lots, Rich Ford, before that was there, it was a go-kart place.
That's right.
And me and my brother used to go up there, and we'd work there so we could drive the go-karts, and they let us drive them for free. And we thought we was getting a deal. They wasn't paying us no money. They just let us drive them. And then across the street where they got the Chrysler place, that was a batting range. And me and my brother used to work at the batting range. Working there, picking up the balls out there. But they let us drive this little go-kart-like thing, or a golf cart type deal. And we'd be out there driving it, and they had a little net right here, and they'd still be hitting the baseballs. And someone would say, let's see if we can hit the cart. We'd be weaving in and out, picking up balls and stuff. And we had fun doing that. And like I said, then they started getting all them car lots and just taking over everything else, changing a lot of the nature of the neighborhood.
The NAACP, they came in and started recruiting. And I remember my dad getting in with Mr. Jones and a number of the men. And we literally, my dad would literally have one of them go with us. I remember one interview I went, I had taken the, back then we took typing and different things, and I wanted this job as a secretary, and you went through a whole regiment of, I remember the employer asking me, will you be able to work well with white people? And when he said that, I'm like, I didn't quite understand what he was talking about, because that's who you work, that's who you work for.
We knew who we were. We knew we could do, anything that we set our mind to. But we also knew there was going to be the restrictions out there. But then we knew that we had to be twice as good, exactly, in anything we wanted to do as the people out there, the white people out there. It made it more difficult for us, but we had been raised up to stand up for yourself, fight, don't give up, because you're worth something and you can do something.
What does the legacy of growing up in the East End Edition, what did that give you that you took with you through your journeys?
Independence. I think I grew up wanting to see the world, and I remember laying in the bed at night and looking up at the stars, and the window would be open and looking up at the stars, and I wanted to go to all of these places. And my mom said, you can go to all of these places. And it gave us a sense of we can go out into the world and we can do what we need to do. There was never any, I don't think we had very much doubt that we couldn't, do what we needed to do.
I always knew that, the neighborhood and the area we grew up in was all black area. And that was always great. That was always great. But I really didn't know about how it started from the homestead. That I know Brenda's always told me how her mom and them, they got it, but I never knew the homestead name.
It was always a real source of pride for us in the family, and an understanding of the importance of owning land and being self-sufficient, and just not allowing barriers or barricades to restrict us. And I think it was very strong legacy, very much my foundation, and I think my cousins and all the next generation.
We go through the whole cemetery, and we go to the grave sites of the neighbors that we knew, and unfortunately some of the children that have gone way too soon. But that in itself is like, we pretty much know the ones that have gone on, we know where they are. And then we went over to the area where the Buffalo Soldiers are buried. And it's a sense of, well, we made a difference.
I just appreciate all the people that homesteaded and went through what they went through to get far as they did and get everybody where we're at, because in all reality, it was a team effort. It really was. It wasn't just one person that made it happen. You see, they had to get others to, when they done the homestead, to witness, and so it was a team. It was a team effort to get where we got right now. The bullying part is still going on, to get something a person wants, but we dealt with it, and we still here, and stronger.
But one of the basic things is that I think that comes down to is respect, love, and faith. I think it's important for us to know from whence we came, where what was before us. It's kind of sad when you do things and you lose your dream. I think that I'd like for them to, whatever their dream is, pursue it, and don't let anything defer it. Don't let anybody, discourage you. Discouragement is not a good thing. So don't let anything discourage. That's what I pray. I pray every day that they will be productive, successful, and satisfied in their life and world, in their world. So I guess that's what I hope that they, and I think that I think that when they learn about what our relatives done before them, that's the reason why it's important for them to know not their own family history, but also our community history, our nationwide history, and our world history. All of that is important for us to know, because it gives us strength. It makes us more respectful of ourselves. It makes us more respectful of others, more understanding of ourselves, and more understanding of other people. And when you have that understanding, you can lift yourself up. Gives you a backbone.
And so we come to the end of some journeys and the beginning of others, the long and continuous thread of history. And we touch the legacy of these revolutionaries that homesteaded, found steady homes, sanctuaries, and thriving communities. Home, a legacy far greater than land that reverberates today.
A race of people is like an individual man. Until it uses its own talents, takes pride in its own history, expresses its own culture, affirms its own selfhood, it can never fulfill itself.
We have gifts to give. There's plenty good room for our gifts. We're just as valid in life.
Find faith in one another. Hearers of God, finding God, inside, outside. The limiting, expectations, visible, vital, valuable. These are the sounds of freedom.
This is part of the vital and valuable history of African Americans in New Mexico. We hope you enjoyed being a part of making it visible.
you.